I'm very happy to welcome everyone to our latest with this webinar, which is titled Women in Japanese Politics, Current Obstacles and Future Opportunities. With me, I have two very distinguished speakers. One is Professor Mari Miura, and she's a professor of political science at Sophia University in Japan, in Tokyo. She has a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, and she's the author of a number of books on gender issues and other political issues. She's also the co-founder of the Academy for Gender Parity, which provides training programs for young women to run for office. She received the Wilma Rule Award for Best Research on Gender and Politics in 2018. And she has also been decorated with a Knight of the Order of Merit from the French government in 2021. We also have Mr. Jakob Edberg, a very experienced, I don't know if I should call you lobbyist or just expert, but you have a lot of knowledge and you're very close to Japanese politicians of all of various sorts in various political parties. You know a lot, and you're also the president and the CEO of GR Japan, and I think that GR stands for Government Relations Japan. So with that, I like to welcome everyone who has logged into this webinar, and I'm very eager to start with asking Professor Miura to say a few words and also show us some slides. And after that, Mr. Edberg will join us with some comments. So please, Professor Miura, the word is yours.
Oh, thank you very much for a warm introduction, Ambassador Vargo. I'd like to thank this opportunity this invitation by Institute for Security and Development Policy, and I'm very much excited about talking about the current situation of women in politics in Japan. Let me share my slides on screen. I wonder if you can see this. Okay, yeah. So today I'm going to give a brief talk about women in Japanese politics and current obstacles and also future opportunities. Probably the participants already aware that there are only few women in politics in Japan. At the lower house, the current share is only 9.7%, and we had a general election in last fall, and all expected that there will be a slight increase of women MPs, but actually there's a reduction in two. So it was 47 before the election, and there only 45 women were elected. So the share of women actually decreased after the general election in the last fall. And now we have an upper house election coming up this Sunday. And upper house is slightly better than the lower house. The women's share is about 23%. And if you look at governors and mayors and prime minister, we haven't had any women prime ministers yet. And governors, there are only two governors, and the mayors in mega cities or municipalities, the share of women is only 2%. So you can clearly see that there are not many women at all in politics in Japan. And this is the graph of the chronological trend starting from 1980s to 2020. And sorry, the Sweden was not included in this graph, and Mexico, France, UK, Australia, Canada, South Korea, and Japan, because that was conducted by a Cabinet Office of Japan, and I was I headed this research team, and the Japanese government picked up those countries which might be similar to Japan. Sweden is always ahead of us. So as a model country, Sweden was too far from Japan. So that's why the Japanese government decided to compare Japan with those countries. And if you look at this graph, 1980s, not Sweden, but among those countries, women's share was less than 5%. So Japan doesn't stand out that much, but 1990s or 200, you can see that there are not much increase in Japan, especially last 15 years. That's a stagnation of women's share. So basically, this is about the lower house situation, but you can clearly see that women's share or advancement of women in politics has been stagnated in Japan, whereas in other countries, you can see a, steady rise of women's share. And also, the curve is quite rapid. Oh, I can't write, last 10 years. So this graph clearly show a clear contrast between Japan and the rest of the world. And this is upper house of G7 countries. As I said that the Japan's women's share in the upper house is 23%, and then the world average is 25%. And Japan actually used to surpass the world average in the upper house in the past. And if you look at among G7 countries, 20 years ago, Japan is this blue line. So Japan is in the middle, but Japan didn't change much. And the countries like France, Italy, the share of women in the upper house were much lower than the level in Japan at the time, but they increased the share steadily. So Japan now is the, the lowest among the G7 countries. But this coming up election is a little bit exceptional. For the first time, the share of women's candidate among candidates surpassed 30%, and actually it was 33.2%. It's a record high. So it's a great news that many women are more likely to run for office, and also many political parties started to commit to increase women. And ADP, that's a ruling party, which has the largest share. And the ADP has been quite hesitant to set the numerical target, but this time this is a numerical target. So they set the numerical target of 30% for peer tier. So that was the first percent. And women's share is actually 23.2%. So last election 3 years ago, there was about 15%. So it's a huge increase among ADP candidates. And a Constitutional Democratic Party and Communist Party, they have a 50% of numerical target, and they achieved the goal. So you can see that more parties are now quite serious and commit to the target that they set. So that's why women's share among candidacy was record high this time. And well, in order to understand why there are only few women in politics in Japan, we need to think about the global factors. I mean, the sort of the common reasons which can be seen globally, and also Japan-specific factors. So let me first talk about global factors, which is applicable to any countries in the world. First of all, still we do have traditional old gender norms by which women are supposed to, predominantly take responsibility of care at home, and men are supposed to have responsibility to earn, and the politics supposed to be men's world. So women still have cultural hurdles to break in to men's world of politics. And such gender norms are still existent in Japan, and especially middle-aged to old-age generation, they still hold this kind of norms. So when women candidates step in and decided to run office, they often face lots of harassments, all kinds of obstacles those harassment basically work to to silence women and discourage women to speak up and also run for office. And those harassment has been quite problematic in Japan. And those harassment take place not coming from powerful politicians, but that's common, but also from voters. So vote harassment is a Japanese term, which has been quite used frequently these days. And lots of supporters actually, not political opponent, but actually in the same camp. And those supporters and constituents harass, sometimes sexually harass women. And they think that, they can control those candidates. And also there are lots of slurs against women. If women's MPs are having small children, often they are criticized that they are not they are not really achieving or fulfilling the mother's role. So that kind of gender norm still constitute a big barriers in Japan, and I think this is a global phenomena. But still, in Japan, because the sexual division of labor is quite strong, still it is maintained. So those gender norms are obstacle for women. And the second factor is there is a huge gender gap in resources. In order to run and also win elections, you need to have money, and also you need time, because campaigning is really taking time, a lot of time. And also political networks is very important to win elections. And in order to create and expand political network, you need to have time. And women have usually scarce time compared to men, because women have to take care of their families. And in Japan, FaceTime is very important. Maybe I'm going to talk about later, but anyway, so those money, time, networks, that's the three important resources that anyone need to win election, both men and women, and anywhere in the world. But the women are more likely to have lesser resources compared to men. So that's another reason that there are not many women in politics. So let me go on to Japan-specific reasons. The Japanese campaign is very much personalized. Of course, you have to get party nomination to run at the national level, but still, campaigning is very much personalized. So you have to organize your campaign team, and it takes money, and also FaceTime matters. That means that you have to meet constituency in person, FaceTime. Of course, then in the last 2 years, we have COVID-19 situation, so the opportunity might be less, but still, MPs have to participate in all kinds of local festivals. And especially in August, we have summer festivals, and MPs participate like 8 to 10 festivals a day. In the fall, there is a sports days or respects elderly days. We have all kinds of religious, but non religious, or local or national, all kinds of festivals. And voters expect their MPs to participate, because that really shows the localness of candidates. And you need to be local in order to get confidence from constituencies. That's why MPs have under strong pressure to participate in those FaceTime meetings. And this is a daytime festival, but at night there are lots of drinking, opportunities. And sometimes MPs have to, participate in 3, drinking, parties at night. And if you have small children, it's very difficult, right? And also when drinking involves, it's more likely to lead to a sexual harassment too. So that's really uncomfortable situation for women. And secondly, nomination process of parties is just so black box in Japan. And the political scientists have been telling this is a secret garden. It's very difficult to know why and how these candidates are nominated. But Japan is a little bit too extreme in this respect. we never know why these candidates are nominated, and no one really questions. In some countries, maybe Sweden too, there are primaries, or there is some kind of, more democratic process by which citizens can hold accountable the parties. But we don't have that kind of accountability process in Japan, and media doesn't investigate either. So that's why the decision making of parties are quite male dominant. They are not accountable, so they can basically find new candidates from their boys network, so homosocial network. So that's another reason that there are not many women nominated. And also the third reason is that we don't have power alternation that often. We experience only a few times, like 2009 when Democratic Party won, and then 2012 ADP regained again. But since then, there is no power alternation. And we cannot really imagine the power alternation will happen sooner. And under this situation, incumbent has a huge advantage. In any country, incumbents have advantage because their names are already known. But in Japan, because the lack of power alternation, incumbents has extra advantage. And incumbents are male dominant, right? 90% of incumbents at lower house is men. And close to 80% of incumbents are men in the upper house. So because of the lack of power alternation, there are not many opportunities, like open seats for any new candidates, including women. So that's a Japan-specific reason to explain low share of women in politics. The good news is that, and also I need to talk about opportunities. So these are all about bad news. So I'm going to talk about good news about Japan. Japan passed a gender parity law in 2018, and that was amended last year to a great degree. And that was prepared by an all-partisan parliamentary group, and that was a private members bill. So that means that it was not government, but the MPs actually drafted the bill. And I was the academic advisor to this all-partisan parliamentary group. And that was set up in 2015 from the pressure coming from women's movement and the quota movement. And association to promote quotas were created in 2011. And that was women's group, and the head was Akamatsu Ryoko, former Minister of Education. And then those women's group heavily lobbied MPs, and MPs decided to create this parliamentary group and then drafted the bill. And the bill is not binding, but still it set basic principles about gender parity in politics. And the law requires all parties aim at fielding the equal number of male and female candidates in all elections. That's a big achievement. Of course, it's not binding, but all parties, that was passed anonymously. So all parties make a commitment that they have to aim at, of course, that's another term, because some party didn't like this law. So we have to, oh, I can't write, forget it. The aim at was added to that wording, but still it's quite important that the goal of women's, it's not like 30%, but 50%. So that was a big hurdle because we have less than 10% women in the diet. But this law set a normative standard that we have to achieve at 50%. And also the law requires parties, the parties are not encouraged to take measures, including setting a numerical target of female or male candidates. So we don't use the term quota here because there is lots of resistance coming from political parties to set quotas. But numerical targets much softer, version of quota, and party can set target at any level. So the law said that there is encouragement of 50%, but you don't need to set 50% if it's too high goal. So you can say maybe, gradually now it's a 30%, next step is 40%. You can do that. That's why ADP set a target of 30%. And after the law was passed in 2018, the Democratic Party for People set a target, and also communists also set a target, and then Constitutional Democratic Party set the target. And this time in 2020, ADP finally set the numerical target for the PR tier. So without this legislation, it would be unimaginable that political parties make such a commitment and set numerical targets. So I would say that even though this was non-binary, but still it sort of set the normative standard for the Japanese society, what we should expect from political parties. And in 2021, the amendment was about, there are lots of small amendments, but one of the important amendments was introduction of harassment preventions. So now political parties are encouraged to make some sort of harassment prevention measures, and diet and also local assemblies. Now it is an obligation. They are required to make a harassment prevention. So the government cabinet office make a harassment prevention videos. For example, it's about 30 minutes. I was in the committee to make videos. It's quite realistic videos. So now I'm using this video and to go to local assemblies and show this video and saying that, oh, this is considered to be harassment, and victim is considered incredibly, uncomfortable, but not just uncomfortable, there is a fear or anger or etc. So I'm using this video to tell the local assembly members and how we can prevent harassment toward women and also men candidates. And I said that normative barriers is very important, and the gender norms. One of the reasons that there are not many women in politics. Now I like to share the data. This is coming from World Value Survey. And there's one question asking, men make better political leaders than women do. So it's a typical question to reveal the respondents' positions about women's role in politics. And in the past, 20 years ago, 43% of Japanese respondents agreed with this statement, but now it's only 22%, right? So it was 43%, and it's now 22%. So it's a good news. So this cultural norm was shared in the past, but this kind of stereotypes has been reduced in the last 20 years. And if you look at Sweden, 20 years ago, it's 70%. So it's close to Japan's current level, and it's only 5% now. And another good news is that if we see the data of under 29 women, only 6% of young women think that men make better political leaders. Women do. So young women's cultural norm is close to Swedish level of now. So, but 50 years of thickness, the decision making are basically dominated by men with older generations, but they still hold this kind of stereotype or gender biases toward women. But over time, I think this kind of stereotype are more likely to be reduced. So it's very important to encourage young women to participate in politics, because they naturally think that gender equality is this is something that they should get, and they get so frustrated that gender equality have been so cannot be gained in Japan. So it's in order to change Japanese politics, not just from women's perspective, but in order to achieve gender equality, I think it's very important for young women to participate and also run for office. So future opportunities. The good news is that mainstreaming of gender issues has been quite going on because of the Me Too movement, or gender gap index by World Economic Forum has been widely shared. last year, Japan's ranking was 120th. That was a huge shame. So all politicians, all bureaucrats in Kasumi knows this number. They do care very seriously about Japan's ranking of gender equality index. So I can see that there is a mainstreaming of gender issues. Everybody knows that Japan's behind. Japan lags so behind. So we need to do something about it. And also generations that which I discussed before, they are quite different. They're completely different because I'm teaching, university. So I see and talk Generation Z every day, and they are completely different from the older generations, and they really care about gender equality. So they really care about climate change, etc. And they do care about the LGBTQ issues. So culturally, Japan is rapidly changing, especially among young generation. And we're going to have local election next year in April, and it's at local elections, independents can also run for elections. But national elections, you need to get a party endorsements. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to win. But local elections, there are lots of independents. So women do not need to endorsement from parties. So I can see that in the next election and local elections, there are more and more women willing to participate in politics and more likely to win. But at the same time, we need more reform. Institutions matter. So we need to amend another round of gender parity law. And it's better to make an obligation of numerical targets. That's one target that we're going to actually focus. And also, we maybe, I don't know how much I should go into the detail about the electoral system of Japan, but the law has, we have a parallel system of single constituency and also PR. And many candidates actually are dual candidacy. So they run in both tier, in a single house tier, single seat tier, and also PR tier. And because of that, the PR cannot be used to increase the diversity of candidates. But in Sweden, you use PR, and if party use PR proportional representations, it's more likely the parties want to have diverse candidates to appeal to different segments of society. But in Japan, 80%, 70 to 80% of PR candidates are also candidates of single constituency. But in single constituencies, party wants to choose only one candidate. So that candidate have to have absolute pressure to win. So that's why, parties choose incumbent. And all models are very, male, it's very masculinized. So that's why it's very difficult for parties to take a chance, and they take a risk in nominating women. So it's better to separate PR and single constituency. That means that we need to abolish this dual candidacy system. And then we can have deeper system like men, women, men, women. There's an alternation of sexes in the party list can be done. And also we have a political party grant, and we have a huge amount of political party grant. So maybe we can create maybe 10% of the grant should be allocated to only women, or we can make such law. Or we can say that, we can cut some of the party grant if party nominates less than some standard of women share. So we can work on this kind of institution amendment as well. Lastly, I'd like to introduce what I'm doing. Ambassador introduced me. I'm a co-founder of Academy for Gender Parity, and I'm running this organization since 2018, and focusing on young women and encourage and train them to be ready to run for office. And now 5 candidates, 5 trainees from our academy are actually running for upper house. I hope some win. And we had 2 camps this year, and I was so surprised that we got the applicants are almost double this year from young generation, especially the teenagers, also 20s and early 30s. So I can clearly see that there are lots of young women who are very much interested in politics, if there are a chance, they are more likely to win. So we need a more social network and a social support to encourage them to run for office. So, so this is really an opportunity for women, especially local elections, because it doesn't take that huge amount of money to run, and it doesn't take a huge amount of time or network to win. So we will see next election, and then in 5 years, I think the Japanese situation will be improved to a great degree. So that's what I see. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for an extremely interesting presentation. I'm sure there are many questions, but let me underline that it is possible for anyone to ask a question, and the best way to do it is to write the question under the Q&A function. And then after the next presentation, we will open up for comments and questions and answers to questions. So now I have the pleasure to hand over the word to Mr. Edberg, and yeah, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I would like to also thank you, Professor Miura, for helping organize my own thoughts. We have very similar thoughts, but you have been studying them and organized them in a very good way. I'd like to take a slightly different perspective. I'm working with Japanese Diet members every day. I'm sitting just next to the Japanese Diet right now, and Mr. Varjo, Ambassador Varjo said that I work with all sorts of, and that's true both in terms of political color, but also in terms of gender. But naturally, because the distribution being what it is, of course, there are many more men that we counterparts that we work with within the Diet, but also I think in the local side. I'm trying to sort of from an academic perspective, seeing and from the every day-to-day interaction with elected officials and with candidates, seeing where the problem lies, and I've been thinking about it a bit. And I think first of all, the gender norms are of course changing more slowly, or in Japan than elsewhere. But I would completely agree with Professor Miura that they are changing very fast in a Japanese context, which normally means fast in the Japanese context means slowly to the rest of the world. But this is how Japan works, but the trajectory is quite clear. And so I've been working with Japanese politics for only 25 years. But I can see that it's a tremendous change over those 25 years that I've been doing it. But that's so they change more slowly, and I think there might be a general perception that it's and it's true to a great extent that the men are having a lot of misperceptions or against women, or do wanting to let them in. But I think it's also mutual. There are a lot of women who actually are not seeking to take on the traditional men's work because of some of the old, I think, economic structure in Japan, in which it would have for a very long time it was economically, financially, probably to many women much more comfortable and much more advantageous to not be working proactively and take part of the labor force, but to reap the fruits of the husband's work. This is changing completely now, but this is how it was 30 or 40 years ago. But it lives on. So even very successful women, very smart, successful women, because of the work style, the lifestyle of working, could have outperformed their husbands clearly in the workforce, but they choose to have the husband to be the slave and then to take care of, to reap the rewards. So I think the norms are changing probably quicker with women, but also with men. But I think it's important to point out that there is a lack of, I would say, appetite for still among some Japanese very smart women to actually get in and engage themselves in politics. The second, of course, is resources. And I think from a Swedish perspective, it might be a bit difficult to understand that you need quite a lot of money, first of all, to start with, to run for a candidate. So yeah, people are talking about, at least, and I can have the advantage of you would at least need 1 million Swedish crowns, which is about 10 million. The exchange rate is changing very quickly right now, so we should be careful. But around that to just get started, you need that heavy cash, and it's very resourceful. You need to employ a lot of people, and again, given the economic disparities that we have, this is of course put women to a disadvantage. So it's just reflecting the economic disparities, which will then be reflected within the in politics as well. And then I think the third point, which I think it's a huge one, and this is what Professor Miura referred to, I think, the FaceTime, but it's the whole lifestyle of being a politician. The expectations are enormous, and it's not only a few religious or semi-religious events a year. It's basically every weekend you work the whole day, the whole week in Tokyo, and in Tokyo every night there are 3 or 4 dinners that you're supposed to be to, so that you can keep the network. And this is competition, of course. And then when you go back to your constituency, it is the whole day, starting in the morning with going to different groups, and then as Professor Miura said, normally a few dinners to take part of as well. And so it does require, it has been, and this I'm sure it will change as well, but it has required the complete sacrifice of your personal life. And for, I think, gender norm reasons, that has been easier for men to do that sacrifice than for women for very traditional. And also led to a lot of hesitancy from women to actually wanting to get involved and having that sort of life. Scrutiny also comes with it, being known, being seen, and then part of that scrutiny comes also harassment, as Professor Gentile said. Then I would say, adding onto all of this is probably also a general level of political awareness or political interest. I would say is also quite low. So it means that the hurdle to get into politics and thinking that you can do it, or that you can achieve something, or that you have something to say, would be generally lower, both for men and women. But I think for women it would be even. So the pool to start with of interested people is smaller to start with. But I think the hurdle there is also quite significant. I will not speak for much longer, but I think how will this be? How can you address it? As I would agree very much with Professor Miura. Changing norms changes, and I think the gender parity law is excellent in that when there is a sense of direction, eventually the institutions change and the institutions adapt, and what was acceptable behavior only 25 years ago, which I still can remember, is not acceptable behavior these days, and there are still some behaviors which are acceptable now which will not be acceptable, and this changes also. So of course, and you change norms both through legislation but also through education, I would say. And the final point, and I hadn't reflected until actually the House of Councillors elections, which we are having right now, the House of Councillors elections has some advantages, and I now can understand why there is a higher rate of women in the House of Councillors election. First of all, you have a set term for 6 years. Which means that the pressure of being elected is not that high. So meaning that you are allowed to have a bit more of your life. And in the lower house, it's 4 years nominally, but it can be the prime minister can dissolve the lower house at any time, which means that you almost have to be constantly in campaign mode, meaning that you have to keep your local constituencies always happy and always remembering your face and always remembering your name. It is not that high of pressure in the House of Councillors, and in the House of Councillors, you are not allowed to work to run on both the representative list and in the district, in the electoral district. These would be my reflections. I would share the assessment that things are changing, and it is interesting to see. Although I hear many different things, but there are many times big quest for, and I have many friends who, when they are making nominations, they are seeking women candidates because they know that they are electable and that it's good for the image for the party, but they are actually struggling to find what they believe are good candidates. Maybe this is a misperception of how candidates look like. And I think to see this as quite a good sign. I've been asked a lot if I don't know anyone who would be willing to run, and many of my colleagues, we have about 50 colleagues here, and none of my male colleagues have been asked to run. After back, almost all of the female colleagues, we're about 50-50, probably a bit more women than men in the office. But I think all of the women colleagues, that when they have been interacting and working with the Diet, they have been basically asked if they wouldn't consider to run to take for office, because I think the party strategist is something to see that that's some political gains to get by having women candidates. But there are also views saying that women will never vote for other women, so therefore by filing a women candidate, you will lose 50% of the vote immediately, and so therefore you shouldn't do that. I'm not sure. I don't think it's right, but those are other things that I normally hear. So I think that would be my very brief and short comment. And again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. Also, thank you, Professor Miura, for the presentation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Edberg. Thank you very much. Very important comments. I wonder, we have questions already, but I wonder, Professor Miura, if you would have any comments on what Mr. Edberg just said before we ask. You're muted.
Sorry. Oh, thank you for your comments, and then we agree with most of points. And yeah, I didn't mention about the low political interest in the Japanese society, and that was a quite prominent problem because the turnout rate is very, very low in Japan, around 50%. I don't know, Sweden is maybe close to 70 to 80%, but in Japan, it's at the national level, it's around 50%. And if you go down to local level, it could be 20 to 30%. It's that low, and especially young generations do not vote. So voting age was reduced from 20 to 18 years old now. So 18 years old citizens vote because they are still live with their parents. By 19 years old, they might go to big cities to work or to study at universities. Then it gets very difficult to vote because you probably have a registration in the old municipalities of your parents' address, but you are actually living in Tokyo. So there are many reasons, but anyway, 19 years old is the lowest of voting rate. So we need to address, encourage those issues. And I think one idea is that we should reduce the age of running. This is currently 25 for lower house and 30 for upper house, but now the voting age is 18. So I think we should allow 18 years old to run. And at local election, I would say that 15 or 16 years old they're old enough to participate in local elections. I think we need this kind of institutional reform necessary to boost the political interest of young generations.
Well, thank you very much. May I use my privilege here as moderator to ask you the first question, and that is, you mentioned the attitudes in society, the attitudes among men. I wonder if Japanese politics somehow require women to change their behavior as candidates, as using a different kind of language or somehow trying to adapt to the male world of politics? Or do you think that there's also a change in the thinking of women and women voters and women participants? And is there a resistance among the women also to change the present situation?
It's a very good questions. And, because the gender norm, like sort of the social pressure to become feminine is quite strong in Japan. So female candidates struggle to navigate this kind of femininity or masculinity pressure, and male candidates can be just masculine and they can prove that they are good leaders. But women candidates have to prove some sort of masculinity to become competent, but same time they have to be feminine enough to be likable. So it's very hard to make a balance, and each candidate has different recipe or different strategy to navigate this, gendered world. But most of candidates, women candidates in Japan, still they maintain femininity. If they are mothers, they really emphasize, I'm mom of 3 children, and motherhood is the only resource maybe in Japan for Japanese women. Because men cannot be mothers, only women can be mothers. That's the advantage for women to play with. So I can see that many candidates with children always emphasize that they are mothers. And the candidates without mothers, the candidates who did not get married, they always get bashing, like, oh, you never get married. If you're young enough, they are saying, they get all slurs that you should get married first and you should get children, and your work is not politics, but in a household. That kind of social message is quite strong. So yeah, I think most of candidates still try to combine a lot of femininity, actually. But at the same time, they are so masculinized, especially among ruling parties. I mean, the Japanese citizens, the women citizens in Japan is very peace-oriented. If you look at the data or opinion polls, majority of women support Article 9 of the constitutions, really against the war or against the use of violence to solve problems, and more supporting the renewable energy and against the nuclear plants, etc. I can see always more than 20% point gap between men and women. So women tend to be more pacifist. But if you look at the women MPs, they are not that way, because they have to respond with party lines. So they do not really represent the women's tendencies in the civil society. So in that sense, I can say that many women need to be masculinized in order to survive within the party. So, but these days, gender issues are mainstream, so it's okay to talk about. But in the past, I can see many women never talk about women's issues because they think that they will be penalized by just talking about women's issues, because they might be only one in the room. So in that case, they have to pretend that they are like men. So I can see that all generation of women tended to be more masculinized. But these days, in the last 5 years, everybody talk about declining population or declining birth rates or gender equality. So it's okay to talk about gender equality now. So women feel safer to talk about women's issues now. So now I can see that women are more, less pressure to be masculinized. But still, that kind of masculinization pressure is always there.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. We have one related question. A question relating to whether there are as political issues, female political issues and male political issues, but perhaps this system could relate to both. I don't know, but it's a question about the tax system in Japan. It's in Sweden, it's personalized. You have you're taxed as a person, as an individual, whereas I think in Japan you are taxed as a household. And I wonder if this is something that female politicians, women politicians are talking a lot about, and is there a difference there in the approach between men and women? And are there such a thing as female issues and male issues when it comes to arguing in, for instance, Japanese parliament, in debates in Japanese parliament?
Right, there are absolutely female issues and male issues, but tax might be slightly, that's very difficult topic to talk about. And it's taxation is personalized, but still there is a household paying system. So that means that the breadwinner can deduct lots of tax break if their dependents are earning less than the same limit. And many feminists are arguing that that kind of tax, the dependency tax rate actually discourage women to earn more. So the feminists are saying to abolish this system, but at the same time, housewives or part-time workers who are getting benefit from this tax system actually supporting it. So Democratic Party, became the governing party in 2019, and people expect that maybe Democratic Party would abolish this system because they are getting support from working women than the housewives. But ADP have a huge support from housewives. So we expected this kind of change, but it didn't happen. Still, even the opposition party like Democrat Party have to sort of make a balance between the interests of working women and also non-working women. It's extremely difficult issue to go into. So if I had to say more like the women's issue, the issue which unify women regardless of working style or earning capacity, reproductive health, and also violence against women. These are two big issues that most women do care. And this is predominantly women's issues. And men talk less about those, domestic violence or reproductive health and rights. Those are the issues that mainly discussed by women MPs. Yeah.
Here's a question which is related to this. I'll quote. Would be very interesting to hear from Professor Miura more about the history of women's movement for political and economic rights and progress in Japan. When former Prime Minister Abe launched the Let Women Shine initiative years ago, many Japanese colleagues reacted by saying that without reforms in childcare, paternal leave, rights in the labor market for women, nothing would change. I must comment also that today, unfortunately, we have all listened to the news about the incident where Prime Minister Abe have been shot. This is a very shocking. These are shocking news, and I really hope that things go well, although it looks rather bad for him. So I'm sorry for this. But coming back to the question, we have a few minutes, but if you could maybe briefly comment about this, what is needed? It's not just talk that is needed, it is also action in some very key specific areas.
Right. So you want me to address two questions? Those are great questions. It's a big questions. I don't know. I can't handle this
the
question
first one about
in
the
2 minutes. The history of women's movement, political, economic rights, and that's progress. It's a big question.
Yes.
So maybe I highlight some of the features. As I said, that the quota movement was the driving force for the gender parity law was enacted. So if we compare internationally, you may think that women's movement is more quiet in Japan. That's true. Any movement is actually quiet in Japan. But from the Japanese perspective or historically wise, I think I can see more and more activists are going on. And that's probably since the earthquake. the Tohoku Great Earthquake, that's really give a shock wave to the Japanese society, and many people started to engage with politics, and lots of mothers who are worried about health situation of their children started to actually to petition or lobbying, and those some of them started to run for office as well. So that was really starting point of the current civic activism of Japan, and women were included in it. And also another huge activist against the security bill in 2015. And then Me Too movement started from around 2017. And now young generations are quite vocal. And then there is SNS available. So it's not like an organization, like a solid organization of the old days movement, but any individual, if you have good ideas, if you could have a nice hashtag, and then some few networks, and people started to organize campaigning and petitions, and the Twitter demo that's so easy to launch. So those things are quite common. And during this campaign, I can see lots of campaigning in SNS, and especially Instagram, because Twitter, Japan is a right-wing area, and you have there's so many, the backlash and the misogyny comments against women. So it's quite dangerous place for women to speak up in Twitters. So I think many women are moving to Instagram, and that's much less violent. But TikTok is more, I getting this information from my students because I don't do either. But anyway, as students are telling me that TikTok is a more male dominant. Anyway, there's so many different tools available now. So I can say that there is a huge rise of women's activists in Japan in the last 5-7 years. And that has a repercussion in women's political interest and also participation. And of course, this new wave of women's activists partially reflected the government decision to promote women's participation in the labor market. And Prime Minister Abe promoted the women's empowerment or create a society in which women shine. And those initiatives have been going on. And then the government always report a gender gap, or or always highlight that there are not many opportunities for women, and data is available, and the media are always reporting this kind of thing. So I think there is a sort of the cycle of media, the government, civil society, academia, and then there is a rising awareness, the social awareness about all kinds of all kinds of institutional, the legal reform necessary, the child care, parental leave, yes, but less about labor market reform because the government is not willing to do. But yes, more so for parental leave for men, absolutely, because government care about the declining birth rates. Yeah, so but separate family names, another issue that's very active among all generations, because Japan is the only country which prohibit for married couple to have separate names. So it's very scandalous, right? So it's 2020. So I think there is and then 70 or 80% of citizens now welcome these separate family names. Yeah. So yeah, so that's thanks to the women's movement, but also the governments also supported to less extent, but supported those movement demands.
Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid our time is up, and just as we've been sitting here, news are coming in that former Prime Minister Abe actually has died. So we express our deepest condolences and for this tragic event. But having said that, I would like Mr. Edberg, would you have a final comment, perhaps?
Well, first of all, I've been also getting the news here. For some strange reason, I got the Korean news saying it before I got the alert in Japan. I'm not sure why that happened, but anyway. So that's of course a very sad moment, and it will have an impact for sure on society as well. I was reflecting on our discussion. I think and some of the questions here. And I have been wondering myself quite a lot about this sort of structural economic discrimination, and the tax issue was raised, and it's quite suspicious to me as well why this hasn't really got a lot more attention. I mean, we're talking about probably the exemption for spouse exemption, which would somehow encourage one of the spouses, and that's normally being the woman, to work up to a certain amount of money so that the other spouse would get some tax benefit from that, and it is very much absent from the discussion. But I think it's and I think for the reasons that Professor Miura outlined, that there's support for it as well. But I think the whole discourse that we would see in Sweden about sort of structural issues, economic structural issues, is not really there. It's more about the rights, as I pointed out, and it's a lot about childcare facilities and about rights and paternity leave. And I think eventually the discussion will turn onto sort of some economic structural issues as well. But they are extremely technical, and it's not the man on the street that is talking about these issues. Like in Sweden, everyone has their view on economic policies. It is very highly structural and highly technical and limited to quite a few people who are talking about those sort of economics, tax issues. But that discussion is lacking. I do recognize in Japan, but it will probably eventually come here as well.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank you both speakers for an excellent presentation and very good comments, very informative. And we will continue from the ISDP side and the Japan Center there to work with these questions and have more meetings. So I hope to see you again in this format or in other formats discussing these very important issues. Thank you very much again, and thank you to the audience for participating.
Thank you.
And bye-bye.
Thank you.